Hello, BookTube. I had appointments early this morning, first thing, and when they were over, I, or what was left of me, was very close to the Brattle Bookshop, which is a great used bookstore in downtown Boston. A lot of you have heard me talk about it many times. And it's a restorative to the soul. It really is. Especially the outdoor sale lot. Just thousands and thousands of books, sorted in no way other than by price. That changes all the time. So if you have as long a history just looking at books and examining books and talking to books, talking about books as I have, it's amazing. It's an amazing experience, a very inward, amazing experience to just go out there and look at all the books. And they're all cheap, so uh, you can grab an armload of them to your heart's content without really worrying about breaking the bank. And that's what I did. That's what I did this morning. I got a bunch of books, and I want to show them to you and talk about them a bit. The first one is paperback. This, I believe, is a UK paperback, although it's not well made. This is Writing a Novel by John Brain, uh, in which he talks about just the business of writing a first time novel. Uh, he writes a whole bunch of. I remember I read this as a library book. I've never had a copy of my own. And I remember that I disagreed with one of the things that he wrote. He writes right at the beginning, there isn't unfortunately any way of discovering whether you can write a publishable novel except by writing it. You're either born with this particular talent or you're not. You can acquire a decent prose style, a deep knowledge of human nature, and, just as important, of the physical world. You can even acquire a facility with devising plots. But if you haven't the ability to sustain a full-length narrative, there's nothing you can do about it. And I remember when I read this, the first time I read this was probably 30 or 40 years ago, and I completely disagreed with that. And time has done nothing but sharpen that disagreement. The elements that he describes, uh, decent prose style, deep knowledge of human understanding, the physical world, a facility with devising plots, that is writing a novel. I guess if he's making the point about can you go the distance? Can you go all the way to the end of a novel? That's a trivial thing. I mean, you can do it. If you put your mind to it, you can do it. This idea that you're either born with that or you're not is, I think, absurd. But he's very frank, even in his introduction, about the practical benefits of writing a novel that gets published. He talks about what what published novelists make back when he wrote this, which I think was in the 1940s. Oh no, it says 1970s, 1978, 1974. He mentions back in 1974 that a decent selling novelist could make £2,000 a year. Which he mentions is not a huge amount of money, but more than some people make for a significantly greater degree of drudgery. I guess inflation, times have changed. But he says he mentions that you should absolutely not think about success, and you should absolutely not think about movie deals or anything like that. You must write to please yourself. You must be completely honest about the world as you see it. At the same time, it's absolutely marvelous to write a successful novel. His first novel was a success. The View from the Top or something like that. A Room at the Top. Don't be misled by anyone. Success isn't an empty shell. It's sweet and succulent all the way through. Apart from the money, there is the satisfaction of having your name mean something, of overnight being sought after, of suddenly becoming newsworthy. But in the long run, it's only the work that matters, and your period as a literary lion might be short-lived. Strawberries are not nourishing and have little vitamin content, but let us eat as many as we can whilst they are in season. And his own life is a perfect example of that. No one knows this author anymore. Room at the Top was a hit. His debut novel was a hit. He wrote a sequel to that novel. He wrote a few other things. He wrote one, I wish I could remember what the name of it was. I read Room at the Top and thought it was only average. But he wrote one novel, I wonder if all of his novels are listed here, that I thought was quite good, about a young writer, clearly heavily autobiographical. Yeah, The Queen of a Distant Country. I would love to find a copy of that. I remember I read that also out of the library and really liked it years and years ago. So my main curiosity about this thing, when I first read this, I had never written a novel. And now I have written many. I've never published any of them. None of them have ever, no publisher would give them the time of day. But I have learned a lot about the process of doing it. Because in the same period of time in which I've written a number of novels, I've also been a critic. So I know when a novel is working and when it's not, whether it's mine or anybody else's. And I hadn't done any of that when I first read this. So I'd be very interested to see the differences. Then this next one I have in an ebook, or I had before my great Nook library disaster when I lost all my ebooks. I had it as an ebook. I'm sure I will have it again as an ebook. And I've had it as a mass market paperback in the old Ballantine black spined mass market paperbacks. And, oh God, some schmutz is falling off of here. I didn't like that. I don't want schmutz falling off the book. I'm just piling everything. Every piece of junk, I'm just tossing it on the floor. I'm making a great pile next to the bed. This is, it's a book I know. It's a book, oh God, there's schmutz all over it. What's going on here? Here, let's get all of this off so that it's not bothering me while I talk to you. We'll just put it all on the floor. There we go. All right, I think that's all of it. This is Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle by Edgar Rice Burroughs. It's an old paperback. These old paperbacks are, when did this come out? These are very, very light, which always leads me to think that paper rationing was in effect. Okay, I don't... this copy doesn't have any reprint information in it. I'm not as good at reading the indicia of a book as, for instance, Mark Richardson or Jason Harrigan, but this just has the 1928 copy date, which is when this came out. But I'm sure that this is not a 1928 edition of Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle. So it was reprinted many times after that, and I couldn't pass it up. It's just quintessential Tarzan. These things are an hour's read, and I love them. I think it's possible that there are only a handful of us on BookTube who have read all of the Tarzan novels, much less all of them many times. I'm one of those people, and this will be a delight to read. Absolutely a delight. There was not even... Sometimes I grab things like this at the Brattle because a part of my mind is remembering that one of the realities of the Brattle is that typically the person who gets rid of this book got rid of all of them, not just one. So if you see one and you think, well, gee, I don't want just that one. Like, for instance, I would be hard-pressed to tell you what happens in Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle. The villains are probably Arabs. But other than that, I'd be hard-pressed to tell you. The cover doesn't help any. That happens in every book. But I saw only this, and you might look at this and say, well, I would want that if I had a bunch of others, but I don't want just the one. But a bunch of others could be coming. Easily. So it doesn't matter. I don't need a whole set of Tarzan novels in hardcover with cute covers. Although it would be great if I did. I would take them, definitely. I grabbed it anyway, and it was a harbinger of things to come at the Brattle. There's quite a bit of science fiction and fantasy, older science fiction and fantasy at the Brattle. Like, for instance, this thing, which I absolutely could not pass up. The Hostage of Xer by L. Sprague de Camp in a hardcover. I could not pass that up. I have no idea what's going on the cover there. I really don't. There's just virtually nothing about it that's right. You wouldn't build a castle like that, obviously, on a perched on a cliff like that. The moons are dead wrong. They could never look like that from any vantage point, especially not from our own vantage point on this cover. And what is this guy doing? What is he? Is he hiding? Is he hiding from the unarmored man with no helmet and no breastplate in a dress? I don't know. I seem to recall very vaguely. I think I read this in a paperback, probably one of the paperbacks that are in the countless boxes of mass market fantasy and science fiction paperbacks in Michael K. Vaughan's Vaughan Manor. I think I read this then. I'm pretty sure that I've read everything by L. Sprague de Camp at one point or another. But if I remember correctly, just very vaguely... there's our author, fresh from ROTC. If I remember correctly, this is part of a series. But with L. Sprague de Camp, that doesn't really matter. This was an author who really knew what he was doing, so he's not... You're not going to start in mid-scene and him not catch you up at all. I don't think it's that kind of a series anyway. But it'll be a blast from the past to reread. And then just to continue along this trend, I also found a hardcover of The Sword is Forged by Evangeline Walton. I have only ever seen this book as an old Timescape mass market paperback. I've never seen it, I don't think, as a hardcover. Didn't know that it existed as a hardcover. This is a great and now forgotten fantasy author, one of the greatest fantasy authors of them all, I would say. One of the rare figures that deserves to stand up there with Merlin Peake and Tolkien and T.H. White, and is most famous for her fantasy retelling of the Mabinogion in 4 books. And the first book of that didn't do well. It had a dumb title, first of all. Always come to Steve before you're titling your book. I will make sure that problem doesn't happen. But once all 4 volumes in the series were printed, and then they came out, for instance, in the US, they came out in a great mass market set with matching high fantasy artwork on the cover. They're terrific. That set, that 4-book run, that tetralogy of Mabinogion books is fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Just one of the greatest works of fantasy that's ever been done. And it was, I think, plagued by spotty sales. Fans recognized it right away and loved it. But this book attempts to do the same thing, retelling the sort of quasi-historical, quasi-mythical ancient Greece. Specifically, in this case, the era of Hercules and Jason the Argonauts and Theseus and the Queen of the Amazons, who is pictured on the cover there. And this is terrific. Absolutely terrific. I had that old Timescape mass market paperback and read it until it fell apart. I don't think I've ever seen this in a hardcover. So it's going to be great to revisit it. Although, if I remember correctly, this also was part of a series, only unlike L. Sprague de Camp, who couldn't write this good at any point, even at the height of his powers. I'm pretty sure that the other books in this series have never been published, if you can even believe that. After 60 years, I'm pretty sure they are finished. This series is finished. This Theseus series about ancient Greek mythology is finished. But I don't think Evangeline Walton's literary estate has ever seen fit to even pitch them to a publisher to get the rest of it out into the world. What I wouldn't give, unless I'm wrong about that. One of you will probably know more about that than I will. And then this next one is a trade paperback, a pretty thing. This is an author I've never particularly liked, but the book was almost free. It was $1. And it, like Hostage of Xer, it also is part, I guess, actually like Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle as well. This is part of a series. This is The Grey Mane of Mourning by Joy Chant. In this lovely trade paperback. These Rohirrim-style warriors of the flat steppes who ride unicorns, but not your grandmother's unicorns. They're savage, great, intelligent beasts. And this is an epic fantasy story about a horrible empire that needs women, that uses women as fuel for its blood sacrifices. And they come to these steppe warriors, these horsemen, and abduct the wrong woman. The woman who was beloved by the man who will change everything to get her back and get her safe. When did this come out? I haven't read this in eons. Oh God, this isn't in good shape either. This came out in 1980. And that's probably when I read it. So 40 years ago. So I will give it another try. Like L. Sprague de Camp, this is part of a series, I'm pretty sure. But if I remember correctly, Joy Chant also takes very good care of the reader. Make sure that you don't feel left out. I'll have to reinforce this in order to read it. But it's clearly going to be a science fiction and fantasy style reading. So that I'm going to be doing. Because, you don't want to resist the Brattle when it gives you hints along these lines. Or you won't get anything. And this next one is a pure example of that. Because the last few times that I've gone to the Brattle, I've encountered this author. In mass market paperback, in an old ace double novel where one side is printed one way and then you flip it upside down and you get another novel printed the other way coming back. And also as a science fiction masterpiece trade paperback that I really didn't like the look of at all. And I don't particularly like this author, or at least I thought I didn't. But the third time's a charm. If the Brattle's going to put this author in front of me 3 times in a row, I am going to say yes. And not only that, but I'm going to pry open my mind and read the author again. And the author is Edmund Hamilton. And this is the best of Edmund Hamilton. Honestly, I don't think I would have been able to resist a cover like that anyway. I don't know what that creature is. I don't know why he's not pointing his gun at it. And I don't know what she thinks about any of this. She seems as doubtful of him as she does of the monster. This is a ton of his short stories. There are a couple here that there are a couple of his stories that are much, much better known than others. I'm sure that they will be in here. Yes, The Man Who Evolved is in here. But there's one other. There's one other that has just got to be here. Yes, He That Hath Wings is in here. All right, so this really is the best of Edmund Hamilton. Edmund Hamilton was present at the creation, as the saying goes. He was right there at the beginning with Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard, and wrote just nonstop. He wrote for anywhere that would write him a $20 or $50 check, and all of the stuff that I've read by him has been very good. I've read, for instance, those stories that I just mentioned, and lots of others. He's just never done it for me at all, and clearly the Brattle wants me to revisit him, so I will be doing that. This thing cannot be beat. So I had to get a copy of this. No idea if this is a science fiction book club or whatever. I'm assuming it's something along the same lines. And I don't know also if this is the hardcover version. There was a paperback series called The Best Of. Best of Philip K. Dick, Best of Fred Pohl, Best of Cordwainer Smith. They did a volume for Edmund Hamilton that certainly didn't have this for its cover. I would have remembered that. I would have kept it. I had it, and I read through that paperback, and I don't know if this is the same thing. This is edited by Lee Brackett. I don't know if that was as well. I'll have to check and see. I don't have that mass market paperback anymore, but I have this one now, so we will give it a try. And that was the fantasy science fiction contingent for this time around. Then I found a book that I have never seen before, and again, you can't help but wonder when you go to the Brattle sale lot is not organized in any way except by price. So you never know what you're going to find, and you never know when you're going to strike a vein and find a whole bunch of things along the same line. And I guess one of those things for me is Charles Eliot Norton. This is Kermit Vanderbilt's biography of Charles Eliot Norton, which is the ultimate Steve book. No one is going to want this but me. No one knows anything about Charles Eliot Norton. There it is. There's Charles Eliot Norton, except for me anymore. And in his preface, Vanderbilt sort of stakes out his ground. He says that I first became interested in Charles Eliot Norton some years ago while reading the New England histories of Mr. Van Wyck Brooks. Studying Norton further, I began to feel that Mr. Brooks, despite his extensive and valuable labors in bringing to life the period of Norton and his circle, had missed what is vital and unique in Norton's own life and work. Shots fired. Norton pops in and out of Mr. Brooks' pages in no consistent guise, though one receives the frequent impression that Norton was an invalid scholar and a carping, overly gloomy critic of his country. The result is not merely a confusing and partial portrait, but, in places, a badly distorted caricature. Norton was, in fact, a first-rate example of Emerson's scholar as a man of action. And his consistently failing health suggests more than anything else the courage with which was necessary to achieve what he did in a long and fruitful life of public service. So, contentious biography is always a fun biography to read. I am pretty sure that I have more Charles Eliot Norton biographies and letters and collected works than anyone else or that anyone needs to have. But I don't have this one. Didn't have it before today. And then talk about a carping, gloomy critic of the state of his country. No one did it better than Malcolm Cowley, except maybe Alfred Kazin. And this is a book that I have longed to find. It's totally outdated now, but it's going to be a joy for me to read. This is his book, The Literary Situation. Only it's the literary situation of the time when this book came out, which was eons ago, 1954. So what agents are doing, what publishers are paying, what book critics, the chapter on book critics I will read right away. It's sort of a medical chart of the literary world of Malcolm Cowley's day when he wrote this. And that day, like I mentioned, has almost completely changed. So it's going to be utterly fascinating. This is a hardcover with one of these plastic jackets on it. So just a find, just a complete find. Then the next two This isn't going to go on forever, I promise. The next two are doubles. They're rebuys because they were dirt cheap. Most of these things were $1, and that means that you can sort of finesse your library. If the books are that cheap, then you're not going to worry about, oh, I already have a copy of that, and so I can't justify the expense. Instead, you're going to sort of angle towards what you really want. And in these next two are solid trade paperbacks that will take the place of heavy hardcovers or books that are gone. The first one is by Samuel Schonbaum. It is his masterpiece, Shakespeare's Lives, in a trade paperback, totally clean trade paperback, with a bookmark that has a motto, "'Tis the good reader that makes the good book," by Ralph Waldo Emerson. I can't get away from Emerson these days. But this is all about the different approaches that biographers have taken to Shakespeare's Lives, to writing his biography. And I found a hardcover of this. The latest hardcover looks like this. But the hardcover before this looks completely different and is squatter. It's not as tall. And I found that hardcover at an earlier Brattle haul, I think earlier this year. And one of you raised a hand and I sent it out. So I didn't have a copy. And I didn't worry about that much because this shows up all the time in used bookstores. And when I saw the trade paperback today, I thought, well, why not? Do I need a hardcover of it? Do I consult it that often? I consult it, but not that often. A trade paperback will probably be fine. So I grabbed it. In its case, it is filling a spot that was left vacant. I find this incredibly fascinating, this book, not only because Schonbaum is a terrific writer, although I would never have told him that when he was alive, but also because, of course, this is the orthodoxy. This is him roasting and assessing and critiquing all the various ways that all the various famous biographers of Shakespeare have taken about the task, on the assumption, only barely questioned in the course of this book, that they aren't all operating on false premises, that on the assumption that there is in fact a Shakespeare to biographize. I just think the whole thing is fascinating. So now I have a copy until one of you asks for it. I guess I will send it out again. But this next one is actually a replacement. I have a big hardcover of this thing, and I would much rather have a trade paperback. Didn't know that it existed in a trade paperback. This is J.B. Priestley's book on King William IV, or George IV, rather. This is the Prince Regent. This is when George III was mad and confined, and his foppish ne'er-do-well son, who owed all of creation money, became Prince Regent and sort of ruled the country and carved out a time period that has since become famous. The Regency period has since become this kind of weird ahistorical idyll where there were no supervising parents in the room, where everyone could have glittering fun, or at least the top 10,000 families could. And Priestley was a novelist, a really cantankerous, thin-skinned novelist who, much like John Braine, had a heyday. The Good Companions by him is a really, really good book, considerably better than The View from the Top by John Braine. It's a minor classic of English letters. It's now gone. It's completely forgotten. Everything else that Priestley wrote is completely forgotten. So it's kind of interesting that I'm getting these has-beens here, but that doesn't mean, just because they didn't last, doesn't mean they weren't talented. That's the point that Braine was making. And this is terrific. This book is terrific. This is this publisher. I don't know. I think this is UK edition, so I'm not sure if that will. Yeah, this is Sphere Books Limited, but there was a movement that went on probably 50 years ago. When did this come out? 1971. Yeah, 50 years ago, to get people like J.B. Priestley or Nancy Mitford or whatever to write big books that would be lavishly illustrated. That's why this is oversized, because it's full of illustrations about historical subjects. And I think the results were really good. I really enjoyed almost all of them that I've read. Mary Renault wrote a big book on Alexander the Great along the same lines at around the same time. So I have the hardcover of this. I'm going to get rid of that and just keep the trade paperback. Then this next one is part of the series that the University of California Press did of British monarchs. Uh, and this is by Frank Barlow. This is his big biography of William Rufus, who was the son of the Conqueror, and a weird, enigmatic figure in English history. We have a large amount of documentation. You can write a big book like this. Is a big, dense book. I've had this many times. I always manage to get rid of it. This time I'm going to keep it. One of the main reasons why I loved it, is because it is sort of the historical counterpart to a great historical novel by Marilyn Durham called Flambard's Confession. He was the Bishop of Durham under William Rufus, and also his friend and a bit of a chronicler. And Marilyn Durham, the author of The Man Who Loved Cat Dancing. Any of you know your old movies? The Man Who Loved Cat Dancing was by her. She wrote a gigantic 1,000-page historical novel called Flambard's Confession, which is all about William Rufus. So it's a gigantic 1,000-page historical novel about an English king nobody's ever heard of. So it was a tough sell. I kicked myself that I got rid of the last hardcover copy that I found. Don't think Flambard's Confession ever had a paperback. I don't think it did well enough. But every once in a while, hardcovers do turn up. I'm hoping that the Brattle turns one up, because I would love to reread it. It's been a while. But in the meantime, Barlow is fantastic. He has a string of biographies that are really good to read. His book on Edward the Confessor is, in my opinion, unequaled. And this book actually is unequaled. Not that there's a great rush of people trying to equal it, trying to write a new biography of William Rufus. Rufus is a fascinating figure. Propagandists went to work on him right away as soon as he was dead. In a mysterious accident, he was shot dead with an arrow while out hunting. And let's just say deer don't fire arrows. so he was shot by one of his own party. I maintain it was his successor that killed him himself. But he led a fascinating life, and the minute that he was dead, in fact, before he was dead, rumors started as to why he had never married or had any children, never had any mistresses, never had any bastards. And the obvious answer that people came up with then and now is that maybe he just wasn't interested in that sort of thing. The calumny that sprang up in his later years and as soon as he was dead was that he had been very fond of sodomy and all sorts of other vile things. And you never know what to make of that. It's such an easy thing for propagandists in a much more religious age to leap to. It's such an easy thing to do. It was done for Edward II as well. You never know how much truth there is to it. Frank Barlow gives it a thoroughgoing examination at one part of this book. But the book is far more interesting for everything else. There's lots of action, lots of intrigue and whatnot. And a weird personality. William Rufus was not like a king at all. But by the end of the book, despite all of his drawbacks, you end up kind of liking him. And then we'll wrap this up. This is the last book that I got. This is a bit of a find. I did not expect that I would ever see this outside of a library. This is by Alfred Dodd. This is Francis Bacon's personal life story. A big biography of Francis Bacon, but it's also a lot more than that. A lot more, because Alfred Dodd was a loon. He was a passionate, intelligent, sweet guy, but there were no blue M&Ms in his bag, if you know what I mean. He looked at the previous biographies of Francis Bacon, all of which had taken censorious tones because Bacon was a corrupt judge. He was caught in corruption at the end of his career at age 60 or something or other, and wrote a confession. And that caused historians to view him with a certain amount of scorn, despite the brilliance of a lot of his writing. And Alfred Dodd's having none of that. Instead, he examines the heck out of Bacon's life. In part one, actually, I don't know if Francis Bacon's personal life story. I don't know. Oh, okay, great. This volume has the two volumes. One is The Age of Elizabeth, Bacon in the Age of Elizabeth, and then the other is Bacon in the Age of King James, which is when he made his confession. And the first part of this is the only part that I have read. The author worked on it and worked on it and worked on it, and then he got further and further down all kinds of rabbit holes, any kind of rabbit hole he could find about Francis Bacon, and there are a lot of them, and wrote the second volume. And by the end of the second volume, the age of James, he was asserting through all kinds of cryptograms and number codes and whatnot, he was asserting that Francis Bacon, in addition to writing his own essays and his own great work of inductive reasoning, in addition to being an official in Elizabeth's court, had also founded the Rosicrucians, founded the Freemasons, was the natural son of Queen Elizabeth I, and therefore the natural ruler of England, and also wrote the plays of Shakespeare. So if that seems to you like a just brain-bending amount of information for anyone to be carrying around in his head, well, Alfred Dodd, if he could come back from the dead, would agree with you, because he'd no sooner finished that second volume than he had a brain aneurysm, a stroke, that was so bad you could practically hear it next door. I'm not saying that writing that second book is what did him in, but it can't have helped any. And so what you get here is full-blown Baconian lunacy. It much like Delia Bacon, only with a lot more scholarship, and that's what's going to draw me to this. That's why I gave a little squeal when I saw this this morning at the Brattle, is because it might be dotty. In fact, there's no might about it. There are lots of things in it that are dotty, but there's a prodigious mind at work here, a prodigious amount of research, and a very good prosmith as well. Let's give Alfred Dodd his credit. This is a Bacon life that I have wanted to own. Even though, if I remember correctly, at the beginning of his book, the irony is just so thick you could cut it with a knife. He says the first duty of a biographer is to get his facts right. Not merely the facts he wishes to be known, but all the facts. To suppress none and slur over nothing, and not to be afraid lest an untoward discovery might falsify his prepossessions. A biographer's duty is to search, to dig, and to spare neither time, trouble, nor expense in the quest, to maintain an open mind, and to allow the Vestal Virgin of Truth to lead him by the hand, even through dark and intricate windings, trusting her implicitly to be guided aright. When a biographer has an axe of his own to grind, the result is a garbled mischief and a curse to posterity. It's just hilarious that he's writing this. The Borgias poisoned only single victims, but there are some writers who have poisoned men's minds en masse, and unfortunately their deadly night work still continues. We must beware of authors who revel in misstatements, suppressions, and loose handling of facts. To arrive at truth, we must either con carefully the writers whose conclusions through later research are really outdated by the discoveries of new facts. So you see there that not only is he a very good writer, but also a totally unaware one, just completely unaware. The irony that he would be talking about, massaging your facts to fit a pre-gone conclusion, when that's all that these books are. And also, parenthetically, just as a glance, him saying that you shouldn't believe the slanders of history until you've examined them yourself, and in the same breath that he's saying that the Borgias poisoned people, when it's easy to draw the conclusion from history that they did not, and that was simply propaganda, and that you're being taken advantage of. This is going to be a crown jewel on the steadily growing shelf I have of books that say that the man from Stratford could not possibly have written the plays that go under the name of William Shakespeare. Although where Francis Bacon would have found the time, I simply do not know. But there's going to be a lot in here that I've never read. That is fantastic. Very, very happy to find this. It's not a Francis Bacon biography that I recommend in the way that, for instance, if you were interested in William Rufus, I would recommend this and nothing else except for Flambard's Confession. I would recommend that as well, because Marilyn Durham was a heck of a good researcher. But anyway, that was my Brattle trip. I don't know why my shoulder is glowing. But let's see if we can do a beleaguered Steve pyramid here. We have Francis Bacon's personal life story, in which, needless to say, Dodd, in addition to everything else, says that Bacon wasn't guilty of the charges that he confessed to, and that King James made him confess. We have William Rufus, the definitive biography. We have The Prince of Pleasure, one of the definitive biographies. It doesn't look like it because it's meant to be a coffee table picture book, but it is actually a really searching, well-written biography of this figure. Then Shakespeare's Lives, which is a biography of biographies. Then we have The Literary Situation, in which Malcolm Cowley gripes for 200 eloquent pages. We have The Best of Edmund Hamilton, where he faces were-cat hamster of some kind. The Sword is Forged by Evangeline Wall in hardcover. The Grey Mare of Mourning by Joy Chant. Let's see here. The Hostage of Xer by L. Sprague de Camp. Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle in one of these cute old hardcovers. A biography of Charles Eliot Norton that I haven't read. Woo-woo. And finally, Writing a Novel by John Brain. His tips for how to write your first novel. After that, he largely says you're on your own. But anyway, that was a Brattle trip for you. Well, I'm going to wrap this up and see what's going on with this shoulder. I swear, the lighting today. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.